Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series in economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at agglomeration economies and urban labor demand. This particular video lecture relates to my urban economics class, in particular chapter 5, and that is figure 5-2. And in particular, what I want our students to understand is why the demand curve in areas where we have agglomeration economies and cities that don't have agglomeration economies, why the demand for labor, the labor demand curves have different slopes because of the presence or absence of agglomeration economies. So right here you can see we have two different demand curves. In red, we have a demand curve which represents labor demand without agglomeration economies. And in blue, we have a labor demand curve that represents the presence of agglomeration economies. So on the x-axis, we have the number of workers that are in a city, and on the axis here, we have the wage rate. So our y-axis is the wage rate, x-axis is the number of workers in a city. So as you can see here, the presence or absence of agglomeration economies impacts the slope of the labor demand curve. So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of examples. Just note that I started at the point here where the two demand curves intersect one another just for convenience to ease with the illustration of why they have different slopes. So let's assume that there's a wage rate that is higher than the original wage rate W. So if we increase the wage rate, you can see if we move to the right, we get the number of workers demanded with that when agglomeration economies are present. And if I continue further over to the other demand curve without agglomeration economies, we can see that we have the level of number of workers demanded at that wage rate in the city without agglomeration economies. So the one thing that you should notice here at the decrease in the number of workers demanded is much greater when we have agglomeration economies present versus when they're not present. The rationale for this is, if you can remember, that when you have agglomeration economies, as the number of workers in a city increases, we see increased productivity related to the fact that we have a large number of workers in a particular area. So the fact that we have such a pooling of labor causes there to be higher levels of productivity relative to areas that don't have agglomeration economies. So when the wage rate increases from W to W apostrophe here, that we have a dramatic decrease in the number of workers demanded, because as the number of workers shrinks, we're losing the benefits of those agglomeration economies. So the shrinking of the number of workers is also causing productivity declines. So that means fewer and fewer workers are going to be hired because of the fact that we're losing those agglomeration economies. On the opposite end, if I want to take a look at lowering the wage rate, so we're starting once again from W, the original point where the two labor demand curves intersect one another. So I'm just going to have a wage rate that is lower than that. So if we follow that over, the first thing that we hit is the labor demand curve without agglomeration economies, and that gives us the level of workers demanded without the agglomeration economies. And if I continue to follow that new lower wage rate over, then we finally hit the demand for the demand with agglomeration economies, and we can see that at that wage rate, the number of workers demanded with agglomeration economies is greater than without agglomeration economies. Again, remember, with the agglomeration economies, as we see this pooling of resources, including labor, we see that there are increases in productivity due to the fact that there's the agglomerations occurring, i.e., you could also look at this as having scale economies. So with the demand for demand with agglomeration economies, when the wage rate falls down or decreases here, that the increase in the demand, the number of workers demanded, is much greater when we have agglomeration economies than without agglomeration economies, because as the number of workers increases, we see increases in productivity related to that agglomeration.